Today's featured speaker is Jim Pouliopoulos, MBA 94. Jim Pouliopoulos is the director of the Professional Sales Program and a senior lecturer in marketing at Bentley University, and as I mentioned, a proud alumnus. His 3 TEDx talks have explored the question of what drives inner motivation and professional success. He is also a certified trainer for the Art of Brilliance, a UK-based firm which specializes in training and development to make people be more positive, motivated, and brilliant. He has worked as an executive coach, trainer, facilitator, and consultant for a number of organizations in a variety of industries. His book, How to Be a Well-Being: Unofficial Rules to Live Every Day, will be published by Wiley Publishing in July 2020. Without further ado, please join me in virtually welcoming Jim Pouliopoulos.
Thank you, Emily. That was great. Thank you for the great introduction. Thank you to everyone for tuning in today at noontime to join us in this discussion about how to be a well-being in uncertain times. When Emily and I and Bethany were putting together the program, we sort of talked about what alumni and the Bentley community might need, and certainly during this pandemic, certainly during this very challenging time, people are really struggling with a lot of issues related to sort of their own well-being. There's a lot going on, and we're trying to process it all. So one of the things that we thought would be good was to kind of go through some of the elements of the book that I've co-authored with Andy Cope and Sanjeev Sandhu, and I'll talk a little bit about them in a moment here. We wrote this book long before we had a pandemic. Let me just switch over to the cover, the book cover here for you on a screen share. We can kind of talk a little bit about some of this content, but there's the book, as I said, is coming out in July of 2020. How to Be a Well-Being. We really wanted to write a book that gave people some actionable rules to help you have a better day-to-day life, which leads to a better overall life in general. And I met Andy on the internet, of all places. I joke with my friends. I tell them that I met a guy on the internet and went to England and spent a week with him. But Andy was an author. He's a positive psychologist. He is the Doctor of Happiness, self-proclaimed in the United Kingdom. And we started connecting over Twitter, of all places. I followed him, he followed me. He saw my TED Talks. I read some of his previous books, and we became friends. And now we're colleagues as well. I visited Andy and worked with him for a week, watching him deliver his material about happiness and well-being. Sanjeev Sandhu, our other co-author, is a trainer, a facilitator, a public speaker, who has an interest in this space as well. And so the 3 of us crafted this idea of writing a book together. The book itself is 22 rules of life, and we put it together beginning last summer. So we're pretty happy that it's coming out. We think that the timing of it is actually fantastic, because it will be out in July, and I think that as people are coming through this period of time where they've been under great mental stress, they will be sort of hung over, and they'll need some sort of guide to get through the rest of the year. And we think this might be a fantastic guide for them to follow. A lot of what we talk about when we talk about happiness and we talk about well-being has a lot to do with who you are internally and how you perceive the external world. So one of the basic questions that we ask when we ask people how they're doing and are they happy and what's their well-being like, one of the questions that I want to ask you, and I want you to think about this for a moment, is the following question: could you be happier even if nothing in the world around you changed? And certainly over the last couple of months, we've had a period of time where lots has changed around us. Okay, so we know that everyone's life, for the most part, has been upended, and people are dealing with all sorts of challenges. But my question to you, and I just want you to think about that, to yourself, maybe make a comment in the chat as well. Do you think you could be happier if nothing in the world around you changed? In other words, today, do you think you could be happier? So take a moment, maybe write some comments, and then we'll go on. One of the things that I hope that you come away with today is this understanding that you really do control your happiness, or you really can control your happiness if you really set your mind to it. So what I want to do is I want to show you a photo of a bunch of children. Now, I don't know what these children are reacting to, but they're all reacting in great emotional way to something. You can see the two young ladies in the center here. They seem pretty happy. They seem pretty excited. They seem pretty happy. And so whatever they're experiencing is great joy at that moment. You take a look at this little gentleman here on the left. He doesn't seem quite so certain. He seems a little, he seems just a little bit concerned about what he's seeing. He's a little overwhelmed by the moment. But my favorite two faces in this photo are these two. They just look, I don't know if they're horrified, if they're, if they've been caught unawares, but the look in their face is certainly not joy. It's just definitely a different kind of emotion. And the reason I like this photo is because of all the different emotions that appear in it, and they're all reacting to the same event. And I think that's something to pause and think about for a moment, because we're all experiencing this period of time together, and we all have different ways of reacting to it. And the thing I want you all to sort of understand is that as you perceive the world around you, we have to develop sort of a pause between what we experience and how we react to it. We are typically very emotional creatures, and we respond out of habit at various times. And so when you have a pandemic, when you have a crisis like we have going on right now, our tendency is to react negatively to it and to worry endlessly about how this will all transpire and how this will all end. And certainly worrying and negative emotions are completely valid. You have to feel them, but your reaction to them is the thing that you can control. One of the other elements of happiness and of positive psychology that we talk a little bit about in the book, and that I've written about and spoken about in my TED Talks, is this idea that there is a way to measure happiness, that there's a happiness equation. So researchers, a number of years ago, some researchers went out and they researched people that were happy, that were unhappy. They measured this level of happiness, this level of joy that people felt. And they took a look at sort of what drives that level of happiness. So they came up with this happiness formula, this measure of happiness, this equation, if you will. I think this appeals well to the folks in the audience that are accountants and finance people, engineers and architects, people that like something a bit more analytical to explain emotions. And as a self-proclaimed recovering engineer myself, I find it heartening that there's an actual equation that can explain happiness. So H, as you see on the screen, H is happiness. And happiness has three components that make it up. Your personal happiness, your sort of sense of ongoing joy has three elements, three variables that you have to think about. The first one is your set point. Now your set point is your natural level of happiness. Think of this as sort of your like your heartbeat. Like everyone has sort of a resting heartbeat, and whatever that resting heartbeat is pretty static over time, unless you get ill or unless you improve your physical condition. But your set point is something that's genetically coded into you. You are generally a happy person or generally an unhappy person, and there's sort of a bell curve of happiness to unhappiness. I tell people, if you're a happy person, you can thank your parents. If you're generally unhappy, you can blame your parents for the biology behind it. But the set point is pretty important because it makes up 50% of your overall level of happiness. And so you can't really change it, but the other two variables, the C and the V, are the areas that we need to look at next. C is circumstance. Circumstance are the external things that are going on around you that can drive your happiness up or down. Certainly right now, we are all experiencing circumstances that are difficult. We're in a pandemic, we're self-quarantining, we're not quite sure when all this is going to end. We are experiencing a lot of stress caused by our environment. Other types of environmental situations that cause your circumstance to go positive or negative are things like where you live. If you live in a stable, democracy, or if you live in a war-torn country full of strife and civil war, certainly that will have an impact on your level of happiness. Where you work is your circumstance. Where you live, your neighbors, the people that you that surround you, sort of those things are sort of the circumstances of your life. The good news behind that is that circumstance only counts for about 10% of your happiness. So it's actually a small percentage if you look at the rest of the equation. So it's a small percentage of the overall level of your general level of happiness. So even though we're living through this whole coronavirus situation, that situation really shouldn't be impacting our happiness more than about 10%, probably for the negative. The other thing about circumstances is they're usually very difficult to change because they're external to you, or they're very expensive to change, right? They take some effort to move to a new country, to find a new job, to figure out how to come out of this pandemic, right? These are all things that are difficult to deal with. The last variable, the V, is the most important one in terms of what you can do during this period of time to increase your level of happiness and take care of yourself a little bit better from a mental health point of view. V stands for voluntary actions or voluntary activities. These are the things that you do intentionally every day, the things that you focus your attention on, the types of thoughts that you have, where you focus your attention, the types of things that you decide to do day in, day out, the type of media and content that you take in. Voluntary actions are about 40% of your overall level of happiness. And so when you look at this equation as a whole, what you find is that you really have within your power the ability to raise your level of happiness on sort of an ongoing basis by making conscious decisions every day about where you will focus your attention and what sort of things you will do. And that really is the basis for the 22 rules that we wrote about in the book. These are all things that you can make conscious decisions about on a daily basis to improve your happiness, to raise your level of awareness of what causes you to be happy or unhappy in any situation, and also to kind of get you to pause a little bit before you react to a certain situation. For those of you that are a bit more visual in the way you take in information, there's your happiness equation as a pie chart. That 50% block on the right is your set point. The red that you see there, the 10%, those are your circumstances, and I have it in red because I think for most people the circumstances are pretty difficult these days. And the 40% is the ability for you to make a conscious decision to improve it and pull it up, if you will. Now, there's one more sort of element behind this idea of happiness, which we need to talk about, and that is this concept of the hedonic treadmill. And what this basically means is, let's say that you play the lottery and you win on a scratch ticket, and you feel this little burst of happiness for a short period of time. It's because you've gotten this great news. You've won a little bit of money and you feel good about it. But soon after that, probably within a day or two, depending on the amount of money you've won and your other circumstances, your level of happiness pretty much comes back to the normal set point, right? You kind of come back to what your average is. And so what we find is that, when I interact with corporations and with people in sales, for example, I teach sales courses and I do some sales training, consulting. I find that although most people will think that salespeople are driven by money, money is one of those incentives that's external. And often because of the hedonic treadmill, you end up falling back to your same level of happiness and satisfaction in the job, regardless of how much more you make every time. It's sort of like a repeating pattern. You're happy for a bit and then you're unsatisfied, and then you got to work a little harder to make more money, and then you're happy for a bit, and then it keeps coming back and forth. And so another analogy that I like to use is sort of, I mentioned it earlier, but your heart rate. About 2 years ago, I realized I had gained a lot of weight over the years and needed to do something about it. When I went in for for my annual physical, my doctor told me that my resting heart rate was probably up in the 80s, just resting, right? And so that wasn't very good. And so through diet and exercise, I lost about 35 or 40 pounds. But the interesting thing that happened is that my resting heartbeat today is about 62 beats per minute, which is much better than the 80 plus that it was a couple of years ago. For me, that's sort of a literal activity on a treadmill that, you know, my heart rate will go up as I'm exercising. It will come back to that set point of 62 or so when I'm not. It's good for me from a health point of view, but also from the happiness point of view. I think that's one of the elements to think about here. The happier you work, the more that you work to make yourself happy and to focus on your well-being, the better your set point of happiness will become. So you'll be better at this over time. It'll be easier to keep your spirits up. So one of the other elements about this is the fact that your happiness affects those around you. Sometimes when I talk about happiness, when I talk about well-being, folks will say to me, but why should I be happier? One of the questions that came in, sort of the pre-questions that came in during registration for the webinar was, what can I do to help the people around me be happy and or raise their spirits or help them through this period of time? Well, one of the things that you can do is understand that your happiness is viral, right? So think about your happiness as an open Wi-Fi signal. If you're happy, your happiness spreads to other people. And this isn't just anecdotal. This is actually another point of research. And I'll talk about those numbers in a second here. But I want you to think about this term, strategic selfishness. And I've talked about this before with students at Bentley. I spoke about it at baccalaureate a few years ago. Strategic selfishness is basically understanding that the better off I am, the better off people around me will be. The better care I take of myself, the better I'm able to take care of the people around me. And this applies to happiness probably as much, if not more than any other element of your life, because happiness is one of those things, your positive outlook is one of those things that's completely in your control. And so if you care for the people around you, you should care about trying to raise your own level of happiness and staying positive in the moment. The research that I want to talk about is research that was done that showed that when I'm happy, if I'm positive, I have a ripple effect to the people around me. And those ripples go out to 3 different degrees. You know, you've heard about the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon game, right? Where you can trace one actor to Kevin Bacon within 6 hops of each other. This is very similar to that. This is 3 degrees of separation from you as a person to the extended community around you. So the 3 numbers to keep in mind are the following. This is all about the ripple effect. In my face-to-face interactions with people, if I have a positive attitude, the people that I interact with face-to-face, and these days face-to-face can be physically face-to-face, which is probably your immediate family, or via Zoom, or via social media. So your interactions with other people around you, if you have a positive attitude, if you're happier than the average, then you help increase the average happiness level of the people that you interact with by about 16%. So just by having that smile and staying positive, the people around you that you interact with directly will have a boost in happiness of 16% without them having to do anything other than to be around you, right? It's pretty powerful. But that group of people, let's call them your close circle of friends or family, when they then interact with other people, your boost of theirs by 16% then results in them boosting the happiness of people they interact with by 10%. So now you've made 2 degrees of jump, if you will. And that 3rd layer of people, when they interact with new people throughout the course of the day, their happiness level can be raised by about 6%. So just the act of being positive has that kind of ripple effect, like throwing a rock into a lake or a pond and watching the ripples move away from it. Now, this gets pretty complicated during this time of pandemic and quarantining, because for the most part, we're seeing the same people and we're around the same people very, very often. okay? So you spend most of your day with the same people, whether it's family, some coworkers, etc. Think about this. The happier that you are impacts through the ripple effect, impacts people around you. They then impact the people around them. When you're in close proximity with people all the time, I like to think of it as ripples upon ripples. When I've talked to organizations about sort of improving corporate culture and improving morale in a company, one of the things I talk about is this ripple effect. If you're working with 100 people in an office, let's say, again, let's talk about this from a pre-pandemic point of view. If you're physically in an office with 100 people and each person thinks about this ripple effect, then those ripples start to bounce off each other. And there's probably a fourth degree of increase of sort of corporate well-being and corporate positivity, because all of the signals are sort of combining and raising the overall level of happiness in an organization. So we've talked about sort of what happiness is, what it's composed of. We've talked about why it's important, this idea of the ripple effect. I think the next thing to talk about is what are some of the things that you can do on a voluntary basis, a voluntary set of actions. I've got a few here that you can focus on, that you can do beginning right now, that you can begin with immediately. The first one I want to talk about is just get more sleep. Regardless of what we're going through right now, one of the biggest issues, and it's been in the news quite a bit this past year or so because of some prominent authors and speakers talking about it, is to get more sleep. Get 8 hours of sleep a night. And this is one of those areas where people, sort of these sleep warriors that say, I don't need 8 hours of sleep. I can get by with 2 or 3 hours of sleep. I can get by with 4 hours of sleep. I can get by with 6 hours of sleep. But when you look at the data, one of the things that is pretty sobering is the data exists that tells us that if you get, on average, less than 6 hours of sleep, lots of really bad things can happen. You have a 45% increase in coronary disease. If you average less than, you have a 45% increase in the chance of having coronary disease if you average less than 6 hours of sleep a night. There's a 200% chance, a greater chance that you'll have a heart attack if you get less than 6 hours of sleep a night. There's a significant weight gain factor here as well. Again, if you average 6 hours or less of sleep a night, your body reacts in such a way that you crave more carbs, and that you probably eat 300 to 400 more calories a day, which leads to significant weight gain throughout each year. And there's so many other sort of health impacts around this that it really is worth paying attention to this idea of sleep as not just something of a luxury, but something as a necessary thing to do every day, right? So we have a circadian rhythm. Each of us has a natural sort of, each human has a natural sort of daily rhythm. And typically speaking, those rhythms are 25 hours to 26, 27 hours. So even though our days are 24 hours long, our circadian rhythm, sort of tells us our day is between 25 and 28 hours in length. But the brain has a set of nerves that are centered behind the eyes. And every day when the sun rises, think of waking up someplace where there's no other lights around, but when the sun rises, those nerves pick up the light and they basically trigger to your body, it's time to get up, it's time to wake up. So it's kind of like your built-in on switch, if you will, right? You're coming out of sleep, you see the light, your body reacts in such a way that it wants to wake up. Unfortunately, these days, in this modern era, we are surrounded by light. I'm sitting here in front of my laptop screen. I've got fluorescent lights above me. It's daytime, and so that's okay. But later in the day, when nighttime arrives, I might be sitting in front of my television. I might be still sitting in front of my laptop. I might have my smartphone out. That glow from all of those devices is confusing to those nerves in our brain. And so from a physiological point of view of being told constantly, it's time to wake up. And when you use those electronic devices late into the evening, your body doesn't quite understand that it's time to go to sleep. When you go to bed, if you're sitting there and you use the TV to fall asleep, it's affecting the way that those nerves operate as well. Your body, again, is still trying to figure out, should I be awake now? It's dark outside, but this light is affecting my nerve bundle here in the middle of my eyes. It's time for me maybe to be getting up, or should I be falling asleep? If you fall asleep with your smartphone and you're checking email late at night, or tweeting, or texting, or anything, or playing a game, again, your brain is taking that light in. There are these blue filtering glasses that have been sold, but they work to some extent, but still the idea here is light at night is not good for sleep. So that's one thing I would recommend, is sleeping in the dark if you can, with no lights. Some of the experts say even if you use a digital alarm clock to turn it away from you, so that at night that light doesn't actually that it doesn't excite those nerves. And finding a way to fall asleep without having the television on, perhaps listening to music, which is a much better way to fall asleep, music or audible books, so that those receptors between your eyes are not being triggered. Avoid caffeine. This is one I struggle with. Those of you that know me know that I drink a lot of coffee, but caffeine has a half-life of 7 hours. So if you have a cup of coffee at 7 o'clock at night, 50% of that caffeine is still in your system at 2 a.m. And I know a lot of people will say, well, I only drink decaf at night. The thing about decaf coffee is that it generally has about 20 to 30% of the caffeine of a normal cup of coffee. And so you're still imbibing caffeine, just a lot less of it. So avoiding caffeine, timing it so that you don't have caffeine in your system if you're having a hard time falling asleep is a critical thing to think about. And another thing that, again, that has sort of socially begun to come back into our mindsets a little bit is this idea of napping. Napping is a great way to kind of give your brain a break and give your body a chance to kind of rest in the middle of the day. Napping is one of those things that with the industrialized society, we've kind of gotten away from. And so one of the things I want to tell you about napping is there was a study done about the effect of napping on your physiological health as well. It was actually done in Greece a number of years ago. Greece, like Spain and many other countries, used to have sort of this culture of the afternoon siesta, about taking a break. Shops would close down, people would take a nap, and then shops and stores would open up later in the day and continue business. When the world became industrialized and Greece sort of stopped having these afternoon naps in general, Harvard did a study, and they found that with 23,000 Greek adults between the ages of 20 to 38 years old, when they abandoned the afternoon nap, they saw a 37% increase in death from heart disease across a 6-year period amongst people that had absolutely no heart disease prior to that period of time. So naps, might be one of those things that we kind of take a little lightly, but a nap in the afternoon, a 20-minute nap in the afternoon, is probably something to think about, especially if your schedule allows for it these days with all of the disruption to our normal schedule. One more thing about sleep. The 8 hours is important because your brain goes through a cycle of sleep. A cycle of sleep begins with non-REM sleep. So this is the sleep where you're not dreaming. Non-REM sleep is the period of time when your brain is eliminating unnecessary information, deleting memories it doesn't need, sort of cleaning up the hard drive. Think of it as like defragmenting your hard drive, for those of you in the IT industry. It's just a way of cleaning up everything, putting things back into place, and making the shop floor clean and usable. REM sleep, which follows the non-REM sleep, is the sleep that we have come to identify as the time that you're dreaming. REM sleep is a period of time when your brain is making more connections between bits of information that are left. And it's also strengthening your memory. So I think of REM sleep in some ways as students that are studying with flashcards, strengthening memories of things they don't want to forget. And also it leads quite a bit to creativity because it helps you make connections you don't normally make. That cycle, non-REM to REM sleep is about 90 minutes long, and you go through 5 of those a night. Now, they're not all the same. And this is why going to bed later than you should, or getting up earlier than you should, has an impact on your physiology, on your health. If you go to bed later than your natural biorhythms want you to go, then you lose out on the non-REM sleep, because in the first couple of cycles of night, that non-REM sleep is what you're going through. So the first 2 cycles are really about organizing your memory. The last 2 cycles of the night are mostly REM sleep, when you're dreaming and forming new ideas and strengthening memory. So when you wake up too early, you take that away from you. So if you're shortchanging yourself on one end or another, you're missing out on 2 different kinds of mental acuity, if you will. So I hope I've convinced you that you need to get 8 hours of sleep. Adjust your schedule for it. There's definitely morning person and morning larks and night owls, and that's a whole other discussion. But find your cycle of sleep and stick to it. Stick to that routine. So the first one was sleep. Again, voluntary activity. You can do this tonight if you really put your mind to it. The second one is in terms of being happier and working on your well-being, is be grateful. Be grateful. I mean, it's easy to say be grateful and say thanks to people, but here are some specific things you can do to raise your own internal level of happiness by being grateful to other people, and at the same time raising their level of happiness. First off, I've told people this often. I really encourage you to start a journal. If you don't already currently keep a journal of your own, please do so. It's one of those things that I started doing probably 40 years ago and have kept it pretty regularly since then. I just use it as a place to think things through on paper. I write by hand. I think it has a closer, sort of connection when you write by hand to your inner thoughts. But I just keep it as a place to kind of think about my day. Most people say, I am intimidated by keeping a journal. So here's the journal I want you to keep. I don't care where you keep it. Keep it on your laptop, keep it on your phone, keep it in a nice notebook with a fountain pen. It doesn't matter to me, but I think what you need to do is every day, at the end of the day, sit down and just write 3 bullet items of things that you're grateful for from the previous day, from the previous 24 hours. It doesn't have to be anything earth-shattering. It doesn't have to be anything that's going to have sort of long-term implications on your life. It could be something as simple as, I drove to the supermarket and I hit green lights the whole way. I'm excited. That was a good day. Or a neighbor of mine dropped off some fresh vegetables out of their garden. That was a great gift from them. It could be that maybe the dog slept a little later this morning. I didn't have to get up as early to take him for a walk, so I got my 8 hours of sleep in. Just 3 things every day. Takes you about 60 seconds to write that stuff down. And here's why you do it. As you start doing this on a daily basis, you begin to then look for other things to be grateful for. Because at the same time every day, you're going to be sitting down with an empty page and you're going to be writing down just 3 simple things to be grateful for. If you really want to put a challenge on this, what I would say is write down different things every day. In other words, avoid trying to repeat an item from the previous day, and write down write down different things every day. And so that over the course of a month, you will have had 900 things that you're grateful for. Your brain will begin to look for those things every day. You will have tuned your brain for positivity and away from negativity. Our brains evolved to look for negative. When we were running from saber-toothed tigers and foraging for food, we were worried about things that could eat us and could hurt us. And so we evolved to a point where just we naturally look for negative. And so in this modern era, we look for things that sort of push that negativity forward. You need to fight that by tuning your brain to look for positive. Another thing you can do to stay positive and also raise your level of happiness is, on a daily basis, challenge yourself to take 1 photo or 1 short video of something that's memorable from that day. Don't wait for some kind of photo op to occur. Just snap a photo or grab a 1 or 2 second video that day of something that you think you want to remember, positive. Same as writing down the things you're grateful for, you will eventually begin looking for things to be positive about. There are apps out there where you can take those 1 second videos and string them together. I've been doing it now for 2.5 years, and I find it has changed the way that I approach most social interactions, or when I go out, I look for things. I look for things that are memorable that I want to capture. And so do that. And then the third and final sort of thing about gratitude that I want to tell you about is pick up the phone and call someone that you haven't talked to in a long time, an old friend, a high school friend that you haven't interacted with in a while, an old teacher, an old mentor, someone that you knew in the past that helped you, or someone that you spent a lot of time with in the past, and for whatever reason you've lost contact with them. There's 2 reasons to do this. One, it will make their day. They will respond with great happiness and gratitude if you do this for them. Hearing from someone in the past like that and getting that nice note or getting that nice phone call from someone, it really does boost the receiver's happiness. But again, think back to my terminology of strategic selfishness. Really what you're doing is you're boosting your own level of happiness, perhaps even more than that person's. You feel good about yourself. You begin to share memories of things that were memorable and happy from your past, which, oh, by the way, raises your level of happiness because you're reliving that moment and the same kind of chemicals in your system are being released. So it's almost like a time machine. You're going back and you're reliving those positive memories that you've had. And the third thing is that there are 2 kinds of appreciation. There's 2 kinds of gratitude. So there's either expected or unexpected gratitude. When I buy something at a retail store, I expect the person behind the cash register just to say thanks or have a nice day or thanks for coming in. That's expected gratitude. It's kind of just given. There's not a whole lot of, usually there's not a whole lot of emphasis behind it, but it's there. Now, if I don't receive that thank you, if I don't receive that have a nice day, if I don't receive that come back again sometime, I'm disappointed. So if you have a situation where someone expects that gratitude and you don't give it to them, they'll be disappointed in the void of it. Now, again, it's usually not the big kind of gratitude, but it's the daily sort of gratitude. So think about that on a daily basis. What's gratitude do you think other people expect? Give it to them. Say thank you. The unexpected gratitude is even more powerful. When someone thanks you for something and you don't expect it, it's really powerful. It comes out of the blue and it makes your day, and that again kind of lingers longer. So your ability to give that unexpected gratitude to someone is really a kind of a superpower. And I think a lot of people don't utilize it often enough. So again, going forward, like for the rest of the day, for the rest of the week, think about the things you can do to be grateful for and do them. And just go do them and thank people. Send a note, send an email, make a phone call. I've called old teachers that I've had in high school and junior high school and had great conversations with them. And I know they've appreciated it, but I felt the boost in my own happiness. And this is something you can do completely voluntarily under your control to raise your happiness. Listen to your regrets is another rule out of the book. And it's also another thing I think that will help you during this period of time. One of my TED Talks centered around my regret of having visited my Uncle Lazarus in Greece, having spent a great week with him in 1989, and drinking his homemade raki, which is basically moonshine, and eating shish kebab and having this fantastic vacation with him, and then leaving and promising that we would do it again. There was something about my uncle that we were very similar personalities. I said, well, I'm coming back. We're going to do this again. And 22 years passed, and I never went back. And I missed out on so much in terms of interacting with him. I spoke to him a couple of times on the phone during that period of time, but it wasn't the same. And, you know, when he passed away 22 years after that week, I really felt ashamed and I felt pain and I really felt this sense of regret. Now, that was sort of a big life regret. But what I'm talking about here is what would you do differently if you thought about the regrets that you have? And this period of time, this pandemic crisis, I think has caused a lot of people to look back to what life was like before all of this happened. And probably you have regrets that you have not dealt with. So they could be things like that you regretted not spending as much time with family, and now you can't. Definitely, I think there's people in the audience that might feel that way. There are definitely people that are thinking about, man, I was thinking about changing jobs before all of this happened. I didn't move quickly enough. I kind of got stuck in my routine. I regret not making a move in that direction. There are people that are probably regretting not asking someone out that they had a romantic interest in, and now suddenly it's much more difficult to date. It could be anything that you look back on and say, I regret not doing this thing or those things before all of this happened, and now suddenly the world is different and I can't. Listen to those regrets, because they're probably giving you a clue about a story that you want to be able to tell. I'm a big believer that life is about the stories you can tell, and the fact that you have a regret is an echo about a story that you can't tell. Regrets are the echoes of the stories you cannot tell. And right now, you're probably looking back and saying, I wish I had done this, I wish I had done that, I wish I had done this. Those are the ways that regrets are phrased. And if you're phrasing things like that, I want you to think about why it is that you feel that way, and what can you do right now differently to ease the pain of that regret. Because there's nothing stopping you from taking some small step towards avoiding that regret in the future or changing the direction of your life right now. Another thing about regrets is sometimes they center around people. Some of the biggest boosters of positivity and happiness centered around people. And you may have regrets, as I said, about people that you've lost touch with. So another exercise you can do right now is to sit down at some point and make a list of 50 people that you've kind of lost touch with over the years, but 50 people that if you heard they had passed away, you would want to go attend their funeral. That list should become your list of people that you call for the next year. One a week, pick up the phone, call that person on the list, because you don't want to get to the point where you can't call them. So if your regret is around losing touch with people, this is an opportunity to put a system around doing it in a much more sort of scheduled way, if you will. So those are some of the rules out of the book. One of the things I want to leave you with is the idea that in this pandemic, since everything has been turned upside down, you have an opportunity here to kind of establish some new routines for yourself as you get through this, and also establish some new routines as you go forward. So one of the things that I hear a lot from people that I talk to during this period of time is how work and family life have now blended together, because we're all working from home. In many cases, we're working at home from our spouses and our kids are around, and it's very difficult at times because you're trying to work, but you're also trying to be at home and be present. I never thought I would say this, but during this pandemic, one of the things that I miss is my commute. When I drive to Bentley, it's about a 30 or 35-minute ride from my home. And that routine of driving to Bentley was always sort of an opportunity for me to mentally go from being at home to mentally being on campus and ready to work. A lot of you who were commuters before this may be feeling this as well. And maybe what you've done is you've filled that commuting time with more work because some sense of obligation or maybe even guilt. And so you might be working longer hours because there's no commute. So one thing I want you to think about is, what is your pre-work routine that you would like to set for yourself during this time when you're working from home? And your so as your day begins, I want you to think about getting out of bed, getting ready for work, and putting in some kind of a routine for yourself that will allow you to kind of mentally switch gears from being at home with family to being at home at work. One of them might be a commute. The reason I miss my commute, I think one of the biggest reasons is because I used to listen to Audible books on the way to work. I could get 30, 35 minutes of an Audible book under my belt each route to and from work. You know, that's an hour a day, and I was consuming books at a much higher rate than I'd ever consumed reading them. I haven't read as many books since all of this started because I don't have that 30-minute commute, but I'm thinking about getting up in the morning, getting in my car, driving for 15 minutes in one direction, turning around and driving back, and establishing my commute, if you will, back to my home office so that I have that separation between, you know, sort of waking and working. Get yourself set up at home, get everything organized, get started with work, and then at the end of the day, have an end of day routine as well. Put the papers away that you've used, close the laptop down, shut everything off, go outside, take a walk, go outside, drive a short distance, and come back in. I think if you start to do that, you'll find a much easier feeling of balance. Now, I know that because you're all home together, it's difficult because you've got people coming and going. But the other thing to think about working from home during this period of time and balance is everyone's doing it. And so if the dogs are barking or the kids are walking into Zoom meetings, it's okay. Most of us have experienced it on both ends, as presenters, as speakers, as people in meetings, and as people that are watching someone on a Zoom meeting and having those interruptions. People understand. People are a lot more understanding nowadays because of that. And so I think that's, I think it's important to note. The other thing is a topic that was brought up on Tuesday, which was process disfluency. And so that's an interesting fancy term for what happens when you're driving home. Let's say during a regular workday, you're driving home in your commute. You leave the office, you get home, and you don't realize that you've driven home. That period of time has just kind of gone by without any kind of mental memory of it. You realize you're home, and how did I get home? That's because it's sort of, you go into this sort of automatic mode because you've done that commute so many times, you're stuck in that mode, you do that commute. How many times have you intended to stop and buy something on the way home, a bottle of milk, a loaf of bread, and forgotten because that's not part of your regular routine? Process disfluency is also the concept that explains why a lot of writers go into coffee shops, because there's just enough noise and commotion and disruption around them that they have to work to focus on the work. Whereas if it's too quiet, sometimes people can't get enough done. So one of the other routines I think that you should establish for yourself in terms of working on your well-being during this period of time is try to learn something new. There's so many online courses right now that you can take, many of which are for free. I personally used to play the drums many, many years ago. Haven't picked up a drumstick in probably 40 years, and decided that during this period of time, I just wanted to learn how to play the drums all over again. So I've gotten some drumsticks, I've gotten some practice pads, I'm tuning into YouTube lessons, and I'm learning how to play the drums again. It's a great mental break. It gives me a chance to break away from work and focus on something else, utilize some different neurons and some different pathways in my brain. And sometimes I find that when I come back from a short drum lesson, that my ability to solve a problem that's been bothering me for a while has suddenly improved dramatically. My final thought for you today is that we are all human kintsugi. And I don't know if you're familiar with this term or not, but kintsugi is the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery using gold to fill it. There's an example of a picture of a piece of pottery here on the screen. The Japanese believe that this type of pottery is more beautiful because of the cracks than it was in its original state. We are all human kintsugi. We all have failures in our past. We've all struggled through things. We have physical ailments, mental ailments, environmental ailments, and external crises that we go through. But we're all more beautiful, more capable than we believe we are because of all of that. If you're tuning in right now, you have survived everything that life has thrown at you. You're here. You're thinking about the future. You're ready to thrive going forward. it's okay that you're going to struggle. It's okay that parts of you will break during this period of time. You are human kintsugi. You will glue yourself back together and you'll get on with life. And if you just, remember that, I think that takes a little bit of pressure off trying to be perfect through all of this and appreciating the cracks that will appear through all of this. So I want to thank you for tuning in. I think, Emily, we may have some questions. I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and I'd be happy to take questions and kind of close it out.
All right, great. Well, thank you. I definitely learned a few things. We've talked about how we can be positive, and this is a great lesson. We do have some questions that have come in, and if you have additional questions, feel free to put them into the Q&A box. I did want to recognize a few people were recommending to you, Pouli, to take a walk with earbuds instead of driving around to save your fuel and save the environment. So.
Okay, that's a good one. I will do
there
that.
There we go. Okay. Yeah. And then moving on to some of our questions. One question is, how does authenticity play in this discussion of happiness? So understanding you have that positive ripple effect, do you fake it or what do you do?
No, I don't think you have to fake it. I think you have to look for what is truly positive in your life. And I think we overlook those things way too easily. We overlook the things that we should be grateful for. So if you're not feeling happy in the moment, that's okay. I mean, it's okay. And I think it's okay to share with people that you're unhappy. But again, look back and ask yourself, did I really have a bad day? Or did I just have a bad 5 minutes that I have milked now for the entire day? And so it's okay to be authentic. It's okay to share your, your difficulties with people, especially people that you care about. Or, in some cases, if you need to reach out and get, counseling or therapy to kind of work through some stuff that's going on, of course, it's absolutely fine. I think what mistake a lot of people make is they feel like they can't admit, what is really going on internally, and then they come off as inauthentic. And when you're disingenuous and inauthentic, it's actually even worse, right? Because then people recognize that. People know when you're authentic or inauthentic, and they can sense it. And so it's much more helpful to other people just to be yourself, but also begin thinking about what you are grateful for. We are experiencing huge disruption, but each of us has a lot to be thankful for. And I think you just have to remember those things.
Absolutely. All right, here we go. When did you receive the biggest shock of your life, personal and professional?
When did I receive the biggest shock of my life?
I know.
Boy, that's a, so I will say one shock that occurred to me was the time I got fired. I got fired. And many years ago, I was working for a company, I was fired. And it wasn't a layoff, right? So I've been laid off too, and that's a little different, but I was fired. And it was a shock, and I guess it wasn't unexpected, but I had a real difference of opinion with, the way things were working in the company. And I came in one day and the president of the company said, we need to talk. And nothing good ever comes after those words, by the way, we need to talk. But honestly, in hindsight, it was probably a great thing to happen to me, because when I look back on it, I realized if I hadn't been fired, I never would have moved my career to a different, along a different path, which got me into a different sort of work. And the second one was getting laid off from IBM many years ago, over 10 years ago now. About 10 years ago. And again, it wasn't a shock so much as I didn't expect it, but the company was laying off lots of people then. But that was the moment when I started this new path of becoming an educator and a consultant and a coach. And frankly, my life has never been better. So those two shocks were actually pretty good. Actually,
lead to more happiness.
In hindsight, right? It's in hindsight. Yeah, absolutely.
One of our most recent alumni asks, I'm dealing with procrastination issues now that I'm working from home. Any tips on how to beat this?
Yeah, I think so. Listen, I struggle with procrastination too. I do. A couple of things I've learned about it is I know that I'm personally better when I have an external person waiting on me for delivery of a product or a service or task, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to co-author a book, not write a book at first, because I needed my two co-authors to constantly hound me for my parts of the book. So that worked out really well. But the other thing, I think, the reason that we procrastinate, one of the things I've learned is that we have too many things that we think we can get done in a day. And so one of the opportunities, I think, is to just cut down the amount of things that you think you're going to do in a day and schedule time to get specific tasks done. And then you realize how little time you actually have to get stuff done. And if you're focusing on things that are truly meaningful and important to you, it's a little less, they're a little less susceptible to procrastination. Believe me, we could talk about procrastination for a long time, but let's do it tomorrow.
Yeah, we could do another webinar on procrastination, that's for sure. All right, another question is about sort of your daily routine. Are there things that you do, what do you do every single morning when you get up? Do you have a set routine? Does that help?
I do. These days I do because, we own dogs. And so the first thing when I joked earlier about the dog slept a little longer and I got a little more sleep, that's kind of a nice morning, but they like to get up around 6:30 and they'll start barking if you're not letting them out. So get up, go outside, out back with the dogs, spend a little time with them, get them fed, let them back in the house. I grab a cup of coffee, I sit down, I listen to the news on the radio maybe for not too long, 15, 20 minutes, check in with my wife, check in with my mother-in-law who's living with us now during this period of time. And then, go get into some clothes, right? Get out of my jammies, put some clothes on and go into my home office and work. And then end of the day, same kind of thing. I try to pick things up and put things away. I've got bins. I'm not a good file cabinet guy. I've got bins where I put things away. And, I try to, and then lately, a lot of it has been tuning into a YouTube channel and watching a drum lesson, or I'm also taking some lessons on illustration. So just something that, it's like mental floss, just something to clear out the brain a little bit. Hey, Emily, one thing I wanted to mention too, before we kind of say goodbye to everyone, if there are folks that are participating, that are tuning in, that are involved in any kind of healthcare company, where they're healthcare workers, frontline workers and so forth, and they would like me to kind of do a short workshop for these people who are under the most extreme stress about this idea of well-being, I'd be happy to do it for free if they want to reach out to me and set it up. So I just wanted to let people know that I feel like that's maybe some small way I can give back to people who are doing really much more difficult work than sitting in front of a Zoom camera. Right? So.
Well, absolutely, yeah. So if you need to get a hold of Pouli to do that and you need to reach out to us, we will definitely connect you, or you can connect with him offline as well. That is a very nice offer. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
And we have hit 1 o'clock, but we'll continue to answer some questions. So if you want to stay on and listen to the questions answered, please do so. The next question is about practicing strategic selfishness. How do you not let the Debbie Downers get to you?
It's hard, right? And I think Andy, my co-author Andy, has a great way of, he calls them mood hoovers. Right? So in England, a hoover is a vacuum, right? We call them vacuum cleaners here. We need an American term for it. But there are mood hoovers around you. And I have found that I think one of the best pieces of advice comes from the movie Frozen. Let it go, right? The mood hoovers will definitely want to share all the misery with you. And it's almost like they want to take it off their back and put it on yours a little bit. And I think one of the best ways to deal with it is to listen, to maybe ask them a question, but don't try to solve their problems, and then just kind of redirect, right? Take a different tack, mention something else, bring something up more positive. Hey, did you hear the news? Or, hey, guess what I'm working on? And redirect it. The strategic selfishness piece is actually something that came to me many years ago. I was going through a really difficult time in my life, a very personal kind of issue that I was dealing with. And two separate people that were kind of advising me through it said very similar things. And basically it comes down to this: you've got to take care of yourself in order to take care of other people. And very often you hear this term or this phrase that, in the event of an emergency on an airplane, put the oxygen mask on yourself before you help others, right? Martin Burge, one of the other Art of Brilliance facilitators, mentioned this recently on a conversation we had. He said, you can't fill someone else's cup if you're dealing from an empty cup yourself, right? So the strategic selfishness piece for me is, don't be selfish in a way that's hurtful to other people. Be selfish in understanding that I need to be happy in order to be the best version of myself and help other people. I think another thing that happens to people is that they get pretty envious, right? And I think this might be happening a little bit more even now, because when you look, and a lot of it has to do with financial envy, right? Or success envy. You look around and say, oh, they're not worried during this period of time. They've got so much in the bank, or they've got all this great stuff. And we're all envious. We all have a bit of jealousy and envy. I'm guilty of it as well. And one of the things that that I've learned is that you really have to kind of redirect your attention instead of being jealous of instead of being jealous of who someone else is and what they have. Ask yourself, am I better today than I was yesterday? Am I a better person myself today than I was yesterday, last week, last year? Measure yourself against yourself as opposed to measuring yourself against someone else. I know it sounds trite, and I know it sounds maybe too easy to do, but most people don't do it that way. And so I think the mood hoovers, the Debbie Downers are people that have not figured that out, and they want to share that misery with you. So ask yourself, am I doing better today than I did yesterday? And stay on that path. I think sometimes you got to jettison the Debbie Downers too. Sometimes it's harder, but you just got to let it go.
Yeah, absolutely. And somebody's question relates to that. In watching the news, so much of it is negative, and it's important to stay informed. Are you finding certain news channels to be better or worse for keeping your mood up?
Yeah, so here's the whole problem with like the echo chamber, right? Depending on how you view life, you probably pick a news channel that kind of feeds you information the same way you like to receive it. I tell people I rarely watch the news. I don't. I mean, I read a couple of online newspapers every day just to kind of keep up with the headlines more than anything. And if there's something that interests me, I dive into it. I think because we're all stuck at home, I think too many people are just tuned into that. And so I guess my advice would be set a timer, right? If you watch one 30-minute newscast, I think you're pretty set for the rest of the day. I don't think you need to watch 6 other ones right in a row. I don't think you need to be obsessed by it. Go to some of the reputable news outlets out there. I'm not going to tell you what's reputable or not. I mean, I think it's up to everyone individually. But, often what I do is I just kind of listen to maybe the local newscast on the radio just to kind of hear what's going on locally for me, and then maybe read a couple of headlines out of the newspaper. But I really don't spend a lot of time, because here's the thing, you can't control any of it, right? So, stay informed, know what you need to be doing to stay safe. But beyond that, there's not much value to it. So I'd say go read a book or listen to a book, but don't drive when you do it.
Right. This person asks, as you get older, I understand naturally it's more difficult to sleep for 8 hours. Is this 8-hour standard for all people at varying stages in life?
It does definitely become less important for older people to get that sleep. It's funny because teenagers need more than 8 hours a day. So it's almost like we kind of balance out our life from beginning to end, right? So absolutely. So the real thing is, if you there's a couple of questions you can ask to see if you're really getting enough sleep. The first question is, after getting up for the day, can you lay down and fall asleep, take a nap before noontime? If the answer is yes, you're probably sleep deprived. Okay, so if you're only getting 6 hours of sleep, if you're older and you're getting 6 hours of sleep a night, and you can't take a nap before noon, it doesn't feel like you can, then you're probably getting enough sleep. The second question is, can you get your day started without a cup of coffee? And if not, you're kind of self-medicating. And I am guilty of this. I am. I've often talked about weaning myself off caffeine. I may at some point, but I do get 8 hours of sleep a night. So for me, I think more of it's more habit and addiction than it is needing it for the sleep. So if you feel like you can take a nap before noontime, and if you need coffee to get your day started, you're probably sleep deprived. And then I would do something about it. Now, teenagers get a bad rap. The teenage brain needs a lot more than 8 hours, sometimes 10, 11 hours of sleep. And yet what we've done is we've made it so that they get up earlier than they should to go to school. They stay up late doing homework and on social media with their devices, right? So they're actually getting less sleep, and as a percentage, they're getting less sleep than most adults. And that's causing a lot of like anxiety and depression and so many other mental issues. So if you have teenagers at home, cut them some slack. They really do need a lot more sleep than we do. And I've always been a big proponent of starting classes later in the public school system, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. Some places have done it, but it's kind of difficult. But that's my it's okay to get less as long as you feel like you're not needing to take a nap and you're not needing to overdose on caffeine. So, and what does he mean by older? Because I'm 57, so I don't know when does that happen, but I think I'm old. So.
Who knows? Older is in the mind of the beholder, right?
Absolutely.
Speaking of teenagers, we have an alumnus from the class of 1984 and says him and his wife and kids are done with school and work, and he's the only one getting up in the morning and working while they're still sleeping. And then a few hours later, they come down, How do you deal with those emotions when they used to all get up together and start their day at the same time?
Oh, that's interesting. So I'm from the class 84 too, WPI, not Bentley, but 84. So you're my age. I guess it's a question of asking yourself, what emotion are you feeling? Are you feeling jealous that they don't have to work and they don't have to get up early and do that stuff? Or are you feeling a sense that you're kind of being tugged back into the family life while you're working, right? And that could be it as well. I don't know. I think those types of things, you just have to acknowledge it and ask yourself, here's what you need to do. You got to ask yourself, what do you want the reality to be like? Like, what would you prefer the situation be like? Would it be that that there's more physical separation when you're working, so that you're not thinking about the family there? So maybe you need to set a couple of different, not rules, but guidelines in terms of when I'm working and interruptions and so forth. Or is it a matter of trying to find time later in the day when it is family time? When you do have some family, some set aside family time to recoup that social connection that maybe you're missing out on. That's an interesting question. I haven't really thought about that much because my children are all living away now, so I don't have that kind of. My wife and I both work from home. We each have a home office, so we're in a little different situation. But I miss seeing my kids physically. Certainly. I mean, and being able just to give him a hug, which my son is a paramedic and a firefighter. So, he's hands off because he's dealing with this directly. My middle child is a special ed teacher, and she's doing the same thing I'm doing, teaching classes via Zoom and keeping social distance. And my youngest just graduated with her master's degree in athletic training and looking for work as an athletic trainer when there are no sports being played. Wow. So, but that distance is difficult. So we do Zoom meetings, we do FaceTime, we do Facebook video to stay connected. And for now, that's what we got.
Well, we'll ask one more question, but before we ask our final question, how can people get a hold of your book when it's published in July?
So if you go to my website, there's a link to the Amazon site. So go to Pouli.com. That's Pouli.com. It's right on the front page. There's a picture of the book. You click on that. It'll take you to the Amazon site. You can pre-order the book now. There will also be a Kindle version closer to the publication date. Right now, you can pre-order the paperback version, but the Kindle version will be available. So, and when you're there, poke around, check out my blog posts. I write a lot about the topics we just talked about. And I've got some videos on there for people if you want to watch a little bit about well-being. You can see my 3 TED Talks there as well. And you can leave me comments. You can send me messages. I'd love to hear from people and see if I can help you.
Great. We put that link in the chat box so you guys can check that out. And it'll also be in our follow-up email. I want to ask one final question for today, and that is, what is the best advice that you can leave us with this afternoon?
The best advice that I can leave you with. I honestly think the best advice I can leave you with is start looking for the positive things around you. Fight the urge to see the negative. Just find every little positive thing. Be intentional about that. It all comes down to that. You can be happier if nothing around you changes. If you just focus on things that you're grateful for, things that make you smile, the rest is going to happen anyway, so you might as well be happy as you go through it. So that's it. Notice the good.
Perfect. A great way to end our talk today. Thank you so much, Pouli. We appreciate your participation. Thanks everybody for joining and sticking around. If you need anything from us, alumni@bentley.edu, and we'll be sending a follow-up with a recording from today's session. Thanks again, everyone.